This is the FM Gold channel of All India Radio. In the program News Analysis, now we bring you a discussion on Rohingyas, a threat to national security. The participants are Neerja Chaudhary, political commentator, and K.V. Prasad, journalist.
The issue of Rohingyas has come on the center stage. The Supreme Court affidavit submitted by the centre very clearly states that the Rohingyas are a serious threat to national security, and they have suspected links with the fundamentalists, the Islamic State people who are supporters in the countries which are inimical to the Indian interests. Having taken the stand, Neerjaji, the centre and many other people have, and its leaders have said that this is an issue because 40,000 people who have been staying illegally need to be identified and sent back to this country from which they come. Ironically, the country from which they come from is Myanmar, which does not recognize them as citizens of the country. They have been citizenless for past very many years, more than a decade or so, and they have remained a stateless people within Myanmar. I think the problem also got accentuated in recent times, but first and foremost, how do you look at what the centre has said?
The Indian government has expressed its concern to the Supreme Court about it being a national threat, their being here. Though, as we know, there are stateless people in their own country, Myanmar. There are stateless people here. There are stateless people in Bangladesh, where they're trying to find refuge. Now, it's a very difficult question. On the one hand, the Indian government has to be mindful of the security concern. If they have intelligent information, and the Supreme Court, by the way, has asked for those intelligence inputs to be given to it on October 3 when the case comes up before it again. On the one hand, there is this thing. If there is information that they have links with terror groups in Pakistan, also that the IS groups are planning to use this or sections of these people for their own ends in India and create problems for the country. That is one. The security aspect that the government is worried about is one part of the story. The second part of the story is the whole huge problem of illegal migrants in India. The problem is swelling, growing, and we also have had illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. This is a major issue in Assam, in the northeast of India. As we've seen, it's been an issue in successive elections also in that part of the country. So should illegal immigrants, no matter how needy, be allowed at the expense of the rights of your own citizens in the country? Their rights, their livelihood, their medical needs, their education, all that gets affected. And therefore, is that right? That's the second question the government has raised before the Supreme Court. And they are valid questions. The third part of the story, of course, is, it is summed up in one of the reports, in one of the papers today, which says that 2 lakh Rohingya children have crossed into Bangladesh. And the UNICEF has set up camps for them. Some of their parents have been killed or they've been separated from their parents, and they are vulnerable now to trafficking and abuse of all kinds. Now that is the human part of the story. There is a security part of the story, there is a rights part of the story, and there is a human part of the story. So it's a very difficult situation that the government and India also finds itself in. Even though we have 40,000 of Rohingyas and the influx started from 2012. So far we had ignored it. They are scattered in different parts of the country. Now things have come to a head, and obviously the government has to take a view. So let's see what the court has to. So far Mr. Rajnath Singh, the Home Minister, said we will go by what the court decides.
In fact, just to put a context, because 2 people who came from the Rohingya community who have been declared or registered themselves as United Nations Human Refugee Council, they are the ones who went to the Supreme Court seeking right to liberty and right to life as 2 issues which is what the primary issue for which the Supreme Court had asked the centre for a response. And yesterday, September 18, the affidavit was submitted, and October 3rd is the next date when the case would come up for hearing. I think the court was also told that several areas where these people are scattered in India, of course, portions is Jammu, Delhi, Hyderabad, Mewat in Haryana. These are traditional pockets, and also these are the pockets where you have these people staying. But as you pointed out, there are two issues. If you look at the security aspect of it, I think what the government of India has said in Supreme Court has been backed by very many party and very many leaders. In fact, Arun Jaitley has been quoted as saying that every country will decide its course of action based on its own foreign policy, its own security policy and balance of population. And of course, there are issues of, as you mentioned, the burden, because the affidavit or the government has very categorically said that they'll start eating into the welfare of citizens. The welfare state concept is fine, everything is good, but for its own citizens, and illegal people cannot settle wherever they want to, and they need to go back to places where they've come from. So this is being strictly looked at from the parameter of what the security is, considering the fact that we are in a situation where we're facing terrorism, there are issues bordering, and the suspect is that these people are easy prey.
You know, the right to life and liberty argument that two of the Rohingyas made to the court, the government has countered that and said that right to life and liberty applies only to the bona fide citizens of the country, not to people who come illegally from outside. That's a fair point. Yet, as I was pointing out, there's a human dimension to this whole thing. There have been stories in the papers of how they've said, well, when they came to India, it's the first time they had a normal, ordinary, routine life, could eat, could laugh without fear and terror. So they were brutally treated in Myanmar. That is why they ran away. Now, what is the answer to this? And a sovereign nation, a country like ours, is also to look at its own citizens, its huge population, the argument that Mr. Jaitley has given. To what extent it's not going to... Suppose you allow these 40,000 to remain, you will have more coming. Where do you stop it? Where do you draw the line? So that any nation will have to face those very tricky questions. And in Europe also, we've seen where refugees have been given shelter. You know, there has been a reaction from the populations of those countries, and governments have gone on those issues. So I think that's where probably the role of international pressure on Myanmar comes in. It is a human problem, and the country needs to take them back or not allow people to leave, and needs to treat them with respect and dignity and fairness like human beings. That is the real crux of the matter. That's where the whole story starts.
In fact, one of the arguments that was advanced by India, and both at the United Nations Permanent Representative, where it said India had recently agreed with Myanmar to provide financial and technical assistance to identify projects in Rakhine, and specifically to undertake infrastructure and socio-economic projects in that area. And this was said by India's Permanent Representative, and when he mentioned this issue had cropped up. If you look at, India is not a signatory to the United Nations, this issue of status of refugees. And these two people who have gone are claiming to be having been registered. Now, this is area which again needs some kind of clarity, because on technical grounds, the government of India is clear that we are following international conventions and that we are not violating any of those things.
Yeah, that's right. The convention relating to the status of refugees, which was enacted in 1951, we said we are not signatories. Therefore, all this, that we should give them shelter, does not apply to us. Yes, legally, technically, we may be on strong wicket there. But again, I keep coming back to the human problem. And therefore, India's offer of technical help, financial help, that in Rakhine, you create livelihoods, you create a humane life for them. Something that the Myanmar government will have to do, and without subjecting them to brutality and torture of the kind that they have made allegations about. And there is obviously a reason why they fled their own homeland to come to other countries. In what they think, many of them keep saying that we have to go back, we might as well die here. That kind of extreme language.
Because they don't have a home per se.
They are homeless,
They're homeless, stateless people. Yes. Bangladesh has provided refuge for many of them. But Myanmar itself, they don't have a statehood. And they are called as Bengalis, because they are not identified as Rohingyas but called as Bengalis, and presume that they have come in from that part of the state. But one more issue that's remained, you mentioned about international pressure. We all know that Aung San Suu Kyi, who's in Burma, Myanmar, she was silent for a long time, and people raised international pressures, international questions were being raised about her leadership, especially after she herself had been a sufferer at the hands of the military junta for a very long time, denied the democratic rights. Very recently, the nascent democracy set in, the SLD government came in, and she is the patron of that. Today, she spoke in a State of Union. She broke the silence, if one may say so. 2 points or 3 points that she made is the government does not fear international scrutiny. 2, it condemns all rights violations. because that applies both sides. That's the implication if we look at. And she said, we want to find out why the exodus is happening, who would like to talk to those who have fled as well as those who have stayed. She says very little is known that a great majority of Muslims and Rakhine have not joined the exodus. She said they'll start the verification from those who wish to return. Now these are the things that she has mentioned, and also probably invited the Kofi Annan to lead a committee to have a look at it. So she's kind of opened herself to scrutiny. I guess this is one aspect that we need to look at.
I think that's a good start after that stand, and as you said, the complete silence on this issue. And I think, and if Kofi Annan can head a committee, then talk to people who've stayed, talk to the people who've gone out, and she's prepared to look at with an open mind at all of them. And if India is prepared to help, other countries, Bangladesh may be prepared to help. And I think it needs a collective effort of several countries, United Nations, to find a solution to this problem. Because to say that we will either allow them to keep coming in waves is no solution, because it could be a national security threat. The government says it is, because obviously they have some inputs. And yet, as I keep saying, it's a human problem. If it involves lakhs of children, it's a very acute human problem. So a way has to be found. And in this day and age, surely countries putting their heads together can find some way which gives them a decent and dignified existence.
In fact, when we talked of the human aspect, I think India has sent relief material to Bangladesh, because that's where almost several lakhs of tens of thousands of refugees have fled to Bangladesh, and Bangladesh itself resources are strained at this point of time. And considering the fact that could soon become a hot potato political issue back home, and Bangladesh will have to run for elections sometime in the next 1.5 or whatever years that the timeline is, India has taken the stance that it will help Rakhine infrastructure projects, socio-economic development projects. At the same time, rush relief material to Bangladesh and its neighbor. We flew a plane load of things to. So I think there is a segregated approach, one, to deal with the human aspect of the humanitarian aid, and two, protect its own national interest in terms of security and the threat perception.
There's another implication to this, and that is for the illegal migrants who have come from Bangladesh. And this is a hot potato, particularly in the northeast of India, as we know. And elections have been decided on that basis. And there are elections early next year in 3 northeastern states. Assam, of course, is over, where the problem is big, but it touches on various states. So I think, given all that, I think it's a very calibrated approach that the government, even though it's taken a very clear position that they have to be deported, which has come as a shock to some people, idea that you give relief material, you help in other ways, mobilize international opinion, and find a way out, prevail upon the Myanmar government and find a way out, is a very calibrated approach that the government has taken, and also looking to the Supreme Court to go into the pros and cons. There's a whole battery of lawyers.
And very high-profile ones.
High-profile lawyers who are appearing for the Rohingyas in the court. So the government has taken the view that we will go by what the Supreme Court finally decides.
But nonetheless, this is an issue because, as you said, India has conversation going on with Myanmar, but we had a statement very soon after we had a meeting there with the Prime Minister's recent visit. Then we have this Bangladesh aspect, which we are dealing on a separate track. The domestic aspect is being dealt, and I think the states-led governments in the Northeast have been very clearly instructed state authorities and state police not to allow the Rohingyas to ingress into these parts, because again, illegal immigration is an issue in that parts.
Despite the movement in Assam, which spawned the creation of the AGP, and it came to power on this issue of illegal migrants from Bangladesh, the influx has continued. Time has come when we say no to that and we stop people coming in if they are illegal.
Interestingly, two people who have held a contrary view. Of course, people in the Northeast have, the leaders have said, Mamata Banerjee in particular, she said all Rohingyas are not terrorists. And then you had the former Assam Chief Minister Tarun Gogoi making a similar approach. So everybody is looking at it
from also successive governments, you remember, encouraged the influx and treated them like captive vote banks.
So I think all this has added to the issue and right now problem. And today we are looking at from the prism of security and the threat to national security and scarce resources being frittered away on illegal migrants. We'll have to wait and see how the case progresses on this issue. Thank you very much.
You were listening to a discussion on Rohingyas, a threat to national security. The participants were Neerja Chaudhary, political commentator, and K.V. Prasad, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website newsonair.nic.in. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.